Ms. Childress, would you please take the roll?
Representative Alleman.
Present.
Representative Angelos.
Here.
Representative Haroldson.
Here.
Representative Pendergraft.
Here.
Representative Sherwood.
Here.
Representative Smith.
Here.
Chairman Bear.
Here.
Mr. Chairman, you have a quorum.
Thank you very much. Ladies and gentlemen, we'll go ahead and open with a word of prayer and pledge of allegiance. So Representative Smith, would you please lead us in a word of prayer?
Lord, we just come before you and we just invite you into this place. Lord, we just ask for your guidance in all that we do. Lord, we just pray for those not feeling well and ask for your healing hand upon them. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen.
Representative Sherwood.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
All very much. We're going to start with House Joint Resolution number 1. And Mr. Fuller, thank you for coming to walk us through that bill and give us a description of what we're attempting to do here. And look forward to hearing about your work on this project.
Yep. Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, Brian Fuller, LSO. House Joint Resolution 1, amending Wyoming's Act of Admission for Earnings. And Mr. Chairman, just by way of background, this is a concept that the Select Committee on Capital Financing and Investments has worked on for the past several years. The primary idea, moving the permanent funds of the state toward more of an endowment model where funds can be invested in investments that would generate a higher investment return. As part of those efforts in 2023, there were 2 joint resolutions proposing to amend the Wyoming Constitution, one concerning the common school account within the Permanent Land Fund, the other concerning the Permanent Wyoming Mineral Trust Fund. And the idea being to amend the language in those provisions to change the references from interest to earnings, to allow the expenditure of a broader array of investment returns rather than the need to invest funds in certain investments that generate interest, as that term has been commonly understood. So what House Joint Resolution 1 that the Select Committee sponsored would do is propose to Congress that Wyoming's Act of Admission, and just for a bit on the Act of Admission, this was the law that Congress enacted to admit Wyoming to the Union in 1890. And as part of that law, lands within the state were granted to the state subject to the sale of those lands constituted a permanent perpetual fund that could only be expended for the benefit of the public schools in Wyoming. In several places in that Act of Admission, the term interest, the interest of which may be expended for the public schools. So what this resolution would do is propose that Congress amend the Act of Admission to change those references from interest to earnings to grant greater flexibility in the ability of the agency that invests funds, the permanent funds of the state, to invest those funds in assets that would generate higher returns. So, Mr. Chairman, walking through the resolution, there are a number of recitals beginning on page 1, line 6, that just outline the history of the enactment of the Act of Admission. The granting of lands, the proceeds to constitute a permanent perpetual fund, and then the interest of which would be expended only for the support of the common schools. Then moving on to page 3, beginning on line 17 is the request that members of Wyoming's congressional delegation would introduce and that Congress would enact legislation to amend the Act of Admission to strike references to interest and replace those with earnings. Beginning on pages 4, 5, and 6 of the resolution is really just a mock-up of language from the Act of Admission showing the changes that are being proposed. So page 4, line 12 would amend section 5 of the Act of Admission, just striking interest and inserting earnings. The same on page 5, line 9 for section 7, and then again on page 6, line 5, to change the word income to earnings. And then the resolution would be transmitted to the President of the United States, the leadership of Congress, and Wyoming's congressional delegation. With that, Mr. Chairman, happy to answer questions.
Thank you, Mr. Fuller. That was a great explanation. So just for the public's edification, just to be clear, this ask would address both of our permanent funds, both the permanent trust fund as well as the permanent land fund.
So, Mr. Chairman, this would only address the common school account.
Okay, on one side, not both sides.
Yeah, so Mr. Chairman, the permanent Wyoming Mineral Trust Fund is a creation in the Wyoming Constitution. That's its genesis, whereas the common school fund, the genesis really is the act of admission, the federal law.
Based on those two sections out of each.
Yes, Mr. Chairman, that's correct.
Township, okay. All right, any questions for Mr. Fuller? All right, seeing none, thank you very much. We'll open this up to public comment. Do we have any agencies here? I know we have Mr. Fleming online. We'll get to him in just a second. Is there anyone in the room that would like to testify on this bill? All right, Ms. Childress, would you please bring in Mr. Fleming?
Mr. Chairman, can you hear me?
I can. Good morning, Mr. Fleming. Thank you
Good
for
morning, Mr.
joining us
Chair.
today to discuss House Joint Resolution number 1. Please proceed.
Yes, thank you. My name is Patrick Fleming. I am CIO for the Treasurer's Office. And I'd just like to expand a little bit on Mr. Fuller's comments about the need for this. And so this is really a two-part situation. Well, first, we need to amend the Act of Admissions, the Enabling Act in the finance, and then we would then follow up on this if it's approved to then change Wyoming's constitution to change the definition of income and interest to earnings like we have in higher ed and the Hathaway. So the reason for this is if you go back to 1890, all the investments were in bonds, right? And so no one really thought of anything other than interest or income in the definition of your investments. So move forward 100 years later when equities became a part of many investments, and then we move even further into the 2000s where you have private credit, private equity, et cetera. The problem arises because of our 5% spending policy that we have to distribute interest and income. And so the difference in that is only dividends and interest income is distributable and then also realized capital gains. The problem with this is that if you look at what's called the endowment model, that basically allows today's types of investments to look at all of our earnings, just like all of you. If you looked at any of your investments, you wouldn't just consider what is being spun off in interest and income, you'd look at everything. Well, the problem with us is we can't, because to make that spend, we have to have the 5% spending policy. We have to have income to do this. So let's say, for instance, that you bought an Apple stock and it was up 100%. We are not able to distribute that. Yes, you'd see our numbers and it's like, great, we're up 100%, but it doesn't matter. We can't distribute it. So the difference is with the endowment model, they just look at the total earnings like all of us would do. And so with that, if you look at how we are handicapped versus an endowment, over the last 10 years, large endowments have averaged 9.1% return, whereas our returns are over the 10 years are around 6%. That's approximately $500 million a year, or $5 billion additional dollars that we could have made if we had these types of policies in place. So as Mr. Fuller stated, this is something that we've been working on and is really critical to be able to open us up to today's types of investments to allow us to invest in, not to invest, but to allow us to account for these types of income earned like an endowment model. So with that, I'll stand for any questions.
Any questions for Mr. Fleming? Go ahead, Representative Harrelson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And Mr. Fleming, thank you for joining us. And probably this could have been a question for you or good attorney staff. So if we get this passed on a federal level, it automatically triggers a constitutional amendment, correct? That's how this is worded and worked from what I could see. Is that correct?
Go ahead, Mr. Fuller. He'd like to weigh in on that. We'll
Yep,
be
so-
with you in a moment.
So, Mr. Chairman, Representative Haroldson, that process of amending the Constitution would not be automatically triggered. The legislature would have to enact a resolution proposing an amendment to the Constitution similar to, and forgive me, I don't remember the exact number, it's either 2023 House Joint Resolution 5 or 6. One of those would be needed as well.
So Representative Harrelson, for the public, you're correct. It's just that the word automatic isn't in there.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Yeah, so this would just, in essence, be the first of two parts. This is for the national delegation. And then after that passes through, then we would do a second joint resolution for the constitutional amendment.
Yes. So I have a question for Mr. Fleming. Thank you again for being here, but we have these two funds. We have the Permanent Mineral Trust Fund, and then we have this land fund that we're discussing today. So in comparison, I believe you're already able to treat the Permanent Mineral Trust Fund in more of an endowment manner, since we have the flexibility that's a Wyoming constitutionally mandated item, rather than something from our Act of Admission. Is that an accurate statement?
Yes, Mr. Chairman. Yes, even though the Permanent Mineral Trust Fund that was put forth in 1974, at that time, again, bonds were really the investment. So they didn't consider earnings. It wasn't until later on when we put forth higher ed and Hathaway that we changed from interest in the verbiage of interest and income to earnings. So no, we do not have that flexibility now with the PMTF that we still need to make this 5% spend. So as I said before, we could have a 20% return for the total fund and yet not fulfill that 5% mandatory pay, which then would hit our reserves accounts. We have to make up the difference for the reserves account. So no, Mr. Chairman, we do not have that flexibility now, and that would then be, we would then need to amend the Wyoming Constitution to allow us to do that.
Thank you for that clarification. So I guess two things. I'm about ready to present two bills that deal with that 5% spending policy, bringing it down to 4.5. When we take those types of actions, does that give you more flexibility in the types of investments in those two accounts if we were able to reduce the spending policy?
Mr. Chairman, great question. So still at 4.5%. So let's just think of it. A 10-year treasury right now, yields at that, 4.5% type range, 4.25% for 2-year treasuries. So even with those, you get corporates and you get a little bit more, you'll still get that type of, approximately that 4.5% return. But the big money earners for us are in equities, private credit. And those are the instruments that we're moving to allow us to invest in that. So if you look back, we weren't even able to invest in anything other than bonds until the late 90s, that we could do 25% in the late 90s. Then in early 2000s, we moved to 55, and it wasn't until 2016 that we moved to 70%. So, we were very late in the game, and hence our 10-year returns lagged because of that. But that still hinders us from being able to invest in these types of higher returning, less liquid investments, or even a public equity that has a realized capital gain. We still can't use that as income per se. So no, sir, we would still have that issue even at a 4.5.
Still getting a bit far afield. We have now these reserve accounts that are attached to each of these permanent accounts. And we recently passed bills to try to raise those to a 5X and then cap them at a 7X return on the spending out of those accounts. Will you, when we get into that 5X, 7X zone, would you then be able to invest in those types of higher rate of return investments that you're discussing?
Yes, Mr. Chairman, another great question. And this is really important of why we did this, because historically our reserve accounts were very low. It was only about potentially a 1.5 to 2 year spend of that 5% spending policy. So by adding additional money into these to get above the 5 to 7, that's kind of a theoretical range that would allow us to invest in more higher returning investments. We now are in the process of moving those reserve accounts into the same asset allocation as the permanent funds. So we did a study and we have left over $100 million on the table by having those reserve accounts. Now that we're in that 5 to 7x, we are now in the process of getting a much higher return and better returns for the state. Now, I just want to question you. I've seen numerous comments, and I know legislators are saying, well, we have this money in the reserve accounts. Let's either take a loan against them or pull them out or what have you. If you do that and reduce that amount of money below that approximate 5 level, then we're going to have to go back into cash. And all of that work that we've done will be for naught, and we'll give back that money, because the difference between cash and the investments that we have could be anywhere from 2 to 7%. It's a significant decrease in our investment income if you do something with those reserve accounts.
Thank you for making that very clear, and I think you've got some allies on this committee to try to stifle that that effort. All right.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
All right. Any further questions for Mr. Fleming? All right. Thank you very much for being here. Appreciate your sharing with those answers.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and the committee. Appreciate your help.
Is there anyone else here to testify? Anyone online, Ms. Childress? Okay. With that, we'll close public comment. Committee, what's your pleasure? Move the resolution. Do I have a second? Okay, moved by Pendergraft, seconded by Representative Smith. Starting on page 1. Any changes? Any motions? Page 2. Page 3. Page 4. Page 5. Page 6. Page 7. Any discussion on the bill? All right, seeing none, Ms. Childers, would you please take the roll?
Roll call vote on House Joint Resolution Number 1. Do pass. Representative Allemand? Aye. Representative Angelos? Aye. Representative Haroldson?
Aye.
Representative Pendergraft?
Aye.
Representative Sherwood?
Aye.
Representative Smith?
Aye.
Chairman Bear?
Aye.
Mr. Chairman, 7 aye.
Thank you. With that, we'll move on to, I believe it's House Bill 217. We've got the clerks and we've got the secretary here. Do we have Ms. Lucas?
I think she's not able to come in right now.
Okay,
I'm able to present it.
we're going to have you do that. A little disappointed in that, but we'll move on because this committee is about getting work done, but we'll have to have a conversation with Ms. Lucas. Thank you for being here, Mr. Secretary.
Well, thank you,
Please
Mr.
proceed.
Appreciate your work. What this bill does, and we'll go ahead and run through it really quick. It's a simple little bill. It's really beautifully drafted, beautifully conceived. And it's about trying to provide a more complete verification of the machines. And it says there on page 1 that each county clerk shall conduct an audit of the ballots in one precinct following each primary and general election. So we're trying to sort of get a random precinct that we are going to do a complete hand audit of to confirm the results. And you'll see on page 2 the procedure. I love bills that have the pitch thrown first. So you got to kind of get the pitch thrown first on page 1, and then page 2 you get the wind up and how it's going to be done. And you see here the Secretary of State will randomly select one precinct in each county to be audited. That is important to maintain that sort of separation between the entity conducting the audit, which is the clerks, and who's actually going to be choosing what precinct to be audited. And it's important to have that separation in terms of principles of auditing. And so the Secretary of State will randomly select that one precinct. And then it says the county clerk shall conduct a hand count audit of all ballots cast in the precinct selected by the Secretary of State and shall compare the hand count result to the result tabulated by the electronic voting system. It gives a 1-week deadline for that audit to be completed, and those results are to be immediately reported, and then we can adopt procedures to make sure, that the method, for example, are we going to use a hat or lots, or how are we going to select that one precinct, that we have that procedure-making ability. I'm in complete support of this bill, this concept of having a more complete form of verification for the machines. This is slightly different from Representative Haraldson's bill that we worked on concerning recounts, and that this committee worked on the other day. And when you think about it, there's sort of three approaches making their way through the House right now. You have Representative Haraldson's bill on recounts. You have this one on random hand audits of one precinct within each county. And then you have Representative Smith's bill, which does away with the machines. So I think Representative Smith's bill is sort of in another bucket. And then you have this two bills which are in the bucket of audits. And one has to do with recounts specifically, and then one has to do with the county as a whole. And I think the two audit bills work very symbiotically with each other. And so I think this is a great bill. I think it works well with Representative Haraldson's bill. And this bill sets more of a uniform standard to be performed for every election. Again, I think this is good policy and something Wyoming should really be empowering itself to do. And I think this strikes the right balance, and it's administratable. And we will continue to work with the clerks in crafting this bill and then also the procedures. But there's a lot of appetite for this. We have to increase voter confidence. It's so important that we have election integrity and voter confidence, and that's why I stand in strong support of this bill. Open up for questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Secretary. Questions for the Secretary and the bringer? Representative Sherwood.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Secretary, for being here with us
Yes, thank you.
today, and I appreciate your enthusiasm. Just curious, if you look in the statute currently, like what we're seeing on page 1 is C, so it's a new section. But if you look at the language in A and B in Title 22-6-130, there's phrases that allow some flexibility in terms of the number, right? So again, a policy decision. Right now on page 2, line 4, it talks about an audit of all the ballots. But if you look at the section A in statute, there's phrases like the number of ballots audited shall not exceed 5% of the total number of ballots cast, or a statistically significant sample size of ballots, say that 3 times fast. So just, again, wondering why we're calling out all ballots in that precinct as opposed to a percentage of those ballots for a random audit.
Mr. Secretary.
Well, Mr. Chairman, thank you, Representative Sherwood. You're talking about the current post-election audit that is in statute. This is very different. This is an audit of all ballots within a precinct. It's a hand audit, not just running it through the machine again, which is, very interesting in terms of an audit perspective, not having a hand examination as opposed to just running it through the machine again. But this, you're looking at the ballot, okay, does it match the CVR? Okay, another ballot, does it match the CVR? This is very, very different. Yeah.
Follow up, go ahead.
Thank you. I do value transparency, and I do want our populace to feel secure when they go to vote, knowing that their vote matters. But I'm also very aware of the amount of additional work that we're putting on our clerks with this. So I'm wondering if you would be amenable to changing the word all ballots to 5%, right? So we're still talking about hand count, but instead of every single ballot, we're either choosing a statistically significant sample size, or we're setting in the statute not to exceed 5% of the total ballots cast, just to help with the lift that it is that we're asking our clerks to do.
Mr. Secretary.
Well, Mr. Chairman, we already have codified the post-election audit, which is about 5% of the ballots, depending on the way that is done. So I think that would be duplicative. The other difference is that they're not looking at the ballots itself. They're looking at the CVR versus how the machine counted it. And this would require an actual hand count audit of all ballots cast, which is very different. Now, if you look at early drafts, it's been fascinating to watch. When you look at early drafts of Secretary Buchanan's original post-election audit, he envisioned a hand count. But the clerks, I believe, pushed back on that, and he then conceded that it would be just an examination of the CVR. And that came out of the later drafts. Obviously, I wasn't privy to that negotiation, but it was in the early drafts of the procedure. And, you know, in light of the Weston County situation, we are continuing to complete our findings on that, where we had a post-election audit that was submitted falsely, that had not been conducted, and then was submitted as if it had been conducted. I think it's very important that we ramp this up, and that's why I think it's very important we pass this bill as it is. You know, and I understand that maybe you don't share the concerns of the public of much of the public on this, but there is a large percentage of the public that has real concerns on this. And it's important that we address our constituents' concerns, and that's what we're trying to do here.
Follow up? Go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And again, I do want our elections, people to have faith and trust in our election process. I just think that this bill is putting a lot of additional work on our clerks that doesn't necessarily result in the public having more faith in the elections. But that aside, if we are going to ask the clerks to hand count every single ballot in a district, how are we going to compensate them fairly for that additional time that they're spending?
Mr. Secretary?
Well, Mr. Chairman, thank you. I think that the counties have revenue that they receive, and every time the counties have duties placed on them, there doesn't necessarily, it can be covered by their general fund. And this notion that the legislature, every time the counties are doing something that they're supposed to be doing, that it can't be covered by their general staffing levels and by the levels that they achieve via this very high property tax levels that the legislature, I think you're doing a great job on it. But unfortunately, we have not gotten broad-based tax relief, and the counties have been able to accumulate large amounts of revenue off these enormous property tax increases. We've had 40 to 50% increases 4 years running now, Representative Scherr. It's huge. I mean, Albany County is getting hammered on these property taxes. And the notion that every time that we say that we have something that counties need to do, that their general funding mechanisms can't handle that, is really problematic in my opinion.
Go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So looking at this broadly, so there has been an increase in property value because we have people outside of our state coming in and paying cash and overpaying. So then our property taxes go up. It's called assessment. But we also have to account for the fact that inflation makes the cost of doing business for our counties and our cities higher as well. And coming from the poorest per capita community in the state, you used Albany County as an example, I do not believe that our county can make up the difference that this unfounded mandate, we are offering property tax relief, which means that there will be less for our counties to allocate towards this expense. So I'm seeing this as a burden to our clerks. I don't see how it increases trust in our elections, and we are not fairly compensating our clerks in asking them to do these recounts. And we can disagree on this. I just think it's really problematic, and that it's very burdensome. And with that, Mr. Chairman, I think I'm done.
Mr. Secretary?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Albany County has had historic property tax increases now 5 years running. And the legislature, not because of the conservative majority in the House, I think a large part of why that conservative majority is there is because of the lack of action from the legislature on being able to attain basic property tax reduction. Now, those counties have been able to receive those enormous increases that have occurred here over the past 5 years. In Natrona County, Representative Sherwood, we've had 3,000% increases per year. 3,000%. This is a crisis on property tax reform. It's a crisis. And we don't know if the governor's going to agree to this broad-based relief. We have no idea. But it stands that really there has been no broad-based relief provided. The counties have been the beneficiaries of this. I think they are able to do this work with the enormous year-to-year increases. The Biden-Harris inflation, as bad as it has not been as high as the year-to-year property tax increases that we have seen. And the Biden-Harris inflation has been a disaster for our country, but has not been as high as the 40, 50% increases that we've seen and that our constituents have been the victims of. So I think that this can be done. I reject the idea that every time there is some sort of duty that the counties need to complete, that there needs to be an increase from the state when they have the general fund that they are provided via their property tax mills to pay for those duties. And so I think it's very dangerous when we get into a mode where every time we try to say, look, this is something the counties need to do, your general fund, which has gone up 40 to 50% per year, can pay for this, to say that there's got to be some corresponding increase beyond the outrageous increases, I think is problematic. So thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Secretary. Any questions for the Secretary? Okay. Thank you, Mr. Secretary.
Thanks, thank you.
All right, Ms. Langford, are you interested in sharing on this bill? Please come forward. Thank you for being here today. We're enjoying getting an opportunity to get to know you better every day.
I've been here a lot, Mr. Chairman. I almost feel like I should have my own chair almost.
We may have one embroidered for you.
Okay, thank you. Good morning, Mr. Chairman and committee members. I'm Mary Langford, and I have the honor of representing the county clerks. My purpose today is to focus on the administration narrowly of Wyoming elections with respect to random hand count audits for election results. The clerks have reviewed this bill, and we'd like to offer a few comments and some amendments. This bill has no additional time to get this work done. It requires looking at all ballots in a precinct, which could have 5 or more ballot styles in it, and that means a whole host of different ballots to review. Appropriations has already passed out the hand recount bill, House Bill 232, in an effort to prove that the voting equipment works. And the number of bills, if successful, that affect administration in county clerk's offices is staggering. As such, the additional administrative impacts will likely lead to the hiring of additional dedicated election staff or the closing of clerk's offices for a duration of time so that these items can get completed. With all of the proposed tax reductions, counties and the county clerk's offices are facing reductions in funding to perform this work. Basically, at some point, where they are going to be tapped, and they're very close to that. I submitted to you some proposed amendments responding to, on page 2, and I don't know, Mr. Chairman, if you'd like to.
No, I
Like
think
to
that'd be fine for you to go
discuss
ahead.
those?
Yes,
Okay.
I'd like to hear your
Okay.
thoughts on these. Please proceed.
On page 2, line 4, as opposed to that being a precinct that gets audited to insert or to consider a federal race, statewide, or a legislative ballot proposition or a race. So that would reduce the size of that audit. On line 5, also to change that from precincts to the race or the proposition at its entirety. And we'd like to expand the time to get that work done to 30 days as opposed to 1 week. And then also, as far as funding is concerned, the addition of a section that requires the Secretary of State to pay for the audit using the hand count account that's established in, or that's been proposed in House Bill 232. And you know, Mr. Chairman, I have to make one comment.
Please.
I served as a county clerk in Sublette County for 32 years, and another job besides being the chief election official for the county is you are also the chief budget officer. So I know very well about how the money goes up and down. When I first started, we were the third poorest county in the state. When I left, we were in the top 3 and had been in the top 3 for quite some time, even overcoming Campbell County at a few times once the Jonah Field went into production and those types of things. And I'm here to tell you that if the county clerk goes in and asks for more money to do auditing or anything to do to election, she's going to get trumped, or he's going to get trumped every time by a motor grader or a snow plow or some other far-reaching, more important piece of work or piece of equipment that needs to do that work. And with that said, Mr. Chairman, I appreciate the opportunity to be here. And I also want to thank you for your consideration of our concerns.
Absolutely. Questions for Ms. Langford? Representative Harrelson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Ms. Langford, for being here. One question I did have on that amendment proposition of going from 1 week to 30 days. Talk to me about when we have, so let's just say we did this audit and we found a discrepancy. If there was that 30-day period, there's already been basically, we've already gone through that election and we've already had that go to the Secretary of State and everything. So basically, we'd be finding a problem after the fact, almost, it seems like. So could you talk a little bit about that timetable and the canvassing board and all of that and what that would look like? And would we be finding ourselves after the fact going, oh, well, how do we go back and fix it if there were to be a flaw?
Ms. Langford.
Mr. Chairman, Representative Harrelson, the time frame is really short after the election because we have, at the present time, we have to have our canvass done. We have to have our auditing done that's statutory now by Friday of that week. So election is on Tuesday, polls close at 7, we're still working. Election's not nearly over. So we have to provide that to the Secretary of State's office, and then so that they can have the state canvass the following Wednesday. So with moving those dates, that gives us some time to include whatever other auditing that we need to do, additional auditing, that's not included in the law right now. And you're right, this will come afterwards. We've already done the statutory auditing. Yeah, it's not a hand count, it's the CVR review, but you're gonna trip whatever issues you've got there. We have faith in the equipment. We're gonna trip whatever issues you have there, and it will be within time that you could say, hey, we've got a problem here. But our experience has been is we've not turned up any issues with the CVR. And we understand that people are concerned about the equipment working properly, but we need more time to get that work done. And that's just a fact of life, if that's what's gonna happen. And if it should happen that several of these bills pass and you're doing one audit and another one, when are we gonna get the work done? And when are we gonna get meet the timetables and, and people and money and all of that? So that's our concern. It's starting to stack up, sir.
Follow-up? Go ahead.
Thank you.
Representative Harrelson.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman and Ms. Langford. So if there were to be an issue though, let's just say, and I'm with you, I doubt there would, but if there were to be an issue and it were to be found after the fact, what does that look like to go back and fix the problem?
Go ahead.
Mr. Chairman, Representative Harrelson, I don't know. I would think that you would take that information, call your canvas board back in and say, we've got a material, if it's a material error, if you're off one and you got a line sled or a landslide race, that's not a big issue. But if you could come back and determine, but I feel with the things that we have in place right now without these audits, we're gonna turn that up by the time we do our canvas already. This is just reassurance. This is just, making sure those kinds of things. I think we would turn up issues right now with the equipment and the procedures that we have in time, where this is just confirmation.
Representative Pendergraft.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Ms. Langford, you mentioned changing the concept from the entire precinct to maybe one or two specific races within there. That you have in a precinct, you're going to have a number of different types of ballots. I would begin by asking you to just shine a little bit more light on that. What do you mean about the different types of ballots? And I will have a follow-up.
Ms. Langford?
Mr. Chairman, Representative Pendergrass, there's, in some precincts, they have different races. And the specific one that I can cite is like in Fremont County. That particular county has, they have commissioner districts, which is unique to their county. So you'll have those kinds of races within a precinct. You'll have, they call them splits. Same thing with House district races. There's different pieces that make up that precinct. So every precinct is unique. So that creates different ballot styles. So instead of there being one ballot for that precinct, there might be 5 or 6 ballots that make up the precinct for that. So that's what that means.
Go ahead, Representative Pendergraft, follow up.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So ballot styles, that rings a bell that is connected to Weston County. And the type of 5% testing that you're doing now tests the equipment. I understand that. Would you elaborate a little bit on what the problem was in Weston County? Was that problem actually with the equipment, or was it somewhere else within the system?
Ms. Langford?
Mr. Chairman and Representative Pendergrass, I don't feel comfortable speaking about that. I know that that situation is under, has been, given to the governor to investigate. I know the Secretary of State's office is investigating. From what I hear, just like everyone else in the public, I'm told it's a human error. And from what I've been told, and I am not anybody different than Joe on the street, but it's a human error. It's not a mechanical error. It's not a machine error. The wrong ballots were distributed.
Any further questions for Ms. Langford? Ms. Langford, a couple of things. You mentioned the funding. You've asked for the 30 days. How did you come up with the 30 days for this amendment? I should have asked the secretary how he came up with 7 days, but I think maybe Representative Sherwood did. But what are your thoughts on this 30-day time frame?
Mr. Chairman, I think it could be shorter. It needs to be longer than what is in this, the time that's in there. I don't think there's anything, excuse me, magical about 30 days. There just needs to be more time.
Okay, thank you. Any further questions? Seeing none, thank you.
Thank you.
Can we bring in Ms. Freeze, Clerk Freeze, please?
Good morning, Mr. Chairman.
Good
Committee.
morning, Clerk Freeze. Thank you for being here. Welcome to Appropriations.
Certainly. I'll start with that last question, if I may, on the Weston County. I think I had explained it, but maybe not to your committee. So Weston County, so when we code our ballots, or when we have our ballots coded, you check them and then you test them and then determine if they're okay. After that happened in Weston County, she had ordered her ballots, they arrived. Then they found an error in one column, which is why it's only affected a few races. So in one column, I believe they forgot vote for, as it was like the name of the title is this legislative district, 2-year term. They forgot the vote for not more than one, or the term one of them, or whatever. So when that was discovered, ES&S was doing her coding. They changed it for her. She reviewed it again. I assume she tested it again. And then, so all the coding was changed for her machines. They sent that out, and then she had already packed up all of her ballots to send to the polls. She then packed up the second set as they arrived. We're in a real hurry situation when we do this, and we try very hard to make sure we don't make this mistake, but it happened. Then she sent the other ballots out. So the first ballots that were given to voters in that second column, the bubble where you mark, that we talked about coding, I believe, the other day on the sides of our ballot, that tells the machine, you're going to see this, you're going to see this oval and this oval, and if one of these is marked, then we're going to count it for that person or for a write-in or undervotes or overvotes. So because that moved down one line, the old ballots were not going to be read by the machine because they were coded to see the new ballot bubbles, if that makes sense. I'm sorry, this is probably way more technical. I'd have to show you in person maybe to get more. Anyway, long story short, so everybody was getting either an old ballot or a new ballot. So the ones that showed up on the machine did its job. It saw the ones that were correct. The ballots that were not correct in that middle column or wherever her column was, those did not get counted because the bubble was in the wrong place. So the machines did do their job. So I wanted to answer that one. Mary did a great job for our association. I just want to kind of go through a few things. So one precinct for me, she did mention Fremont County. We do have the most unique county, of course, with 8 school districts and commissioner districts, legislative districts, a ton of special districts. In a primary, we got to remember in a primary, so now if you say one precinct, that's Democrat, that's Republican, and any other minor party that maybe move up to have a ballot in the primary, I'd have to do that one as well. And the nonpartisan ballot, if it was a precinct that has a nonpartisan ballot. So for me, I could have 7 to 8 to 10 ballot styles in a primary. And in the general this year, I had 26 offices and ballot propositions on ballots. But in like in the next election that we have, where all the county offices, all the state offices, that could be 30 to 40 ballot issues on a ballot. That's a lot. So to give you kind of an idea of what that would cost in time that it takes, Natrona County did a recount with their machine this year, 34,000 plus ballots with a machine. Took 8 hours and 17 staff members. And because she had staff, it was approximate cost of $3,500. So to give you an idea, that was just one office. That's just one office that took that much time to do. So the 30 days is not unreasonable. So think about it this way. So we've already kind of agreed to and worked to with you guys. We don't want to lose our machine. So we're trying to work with you. So we agreed to the recount and we worked hard on that, the bill that's going. That was moved up 2 weeks just to help make sure we could do, again, maybe one office in a recount. So that's 2 weeks that we were granted. So the primary in that one was moved up 2 weeks. So if what I'm telling you is with we do all these ballot styles. So like for me, you give me a precinct, it might have like in the primary, these 7 or 8 ballot styles. And in Du Bois is one of my larger ones. It could be 1,500 ballots for me in Fremont County. That's how much a precinct would be for me. There's other ones in Laramie and Natrona that are going to be maybe bigger than that. So just remember that. So that timing of saying 30 days out, you just need to move the primary 30 days closer to the beginning of summer than in August, if you want us to be able to do this audit for you. And I agree, if we're going to do an audit and it proves something's wrong with the machines, we don't want to go to a canvas because you're going to repeat your canvas. So we don't want to do that. So I think 30 days is not unreasonable at all, especially if we do that. Then we do the election and results, and all of a sudden now we find out we have to do a recount. Now we have a recount to do, and then we've got to get to the canvas. We really have to have time to do that. The other thing I wanted to say was that again, who's going to pay for this? I am in a county that's up and down with our evaluation all the time. We're a mineral, but we're not mineral. We lost a lot of money this year for a lot of different reasons. Some of our fields getting sold to the tribes, which no money's coming in this county for that. We pay for everything. We do it all on the local level. There's no money coming from the state for your federal, state, legislative districts, but we do charge all of our little guys down here. So the cities and towns and counties are having to pay that. Do I now have to go out and say, okay, this legislature wants us to do that. Now you guys have to pony up out of your little districts because I'm going to have to do an audit that's going to include your stuff. I think that's only reasonable if you want us to do it on the county level. So I also agree. If we can use that state fund and you put some money into it, then if that's important to you, then maybe that's what we should do. We have looked at a lot of bills already this session, and we are trying really, really hard to tell you we could administer it, but it's getting scary for a lot of us of how much we can do. We've been trying to be really careful. We don't want to lose our machine. So if that bill comes, we really don't want that to happen. So we're trying to work with you. My suggestion also is, can you just pick one office? If you have a precinct and you want us to look at it, if we could just have one office or one proposition that we're looking at, that would really be helpful. So with that, I stand for any other questions.
Questions for Ms. Freeze? Clerk Freeze. Representative Haroldson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Clerk Freeze, for being here and speaking on this. As I'm looking at 232, and as I drafted that bill, I believe in some ways, I think we have a duplication here. I think we already have a mechanism for the Secretary of State, for you guys, to audit something you have a concern on. We already have a random audit in there, and we already have statutory percentage audits in there. I think that, and this is it, I hear the people's concern. I hear that. I think that 232 gives a vehicle and a mechanism for fixing that. I do agree with you that if we're not careful, we load you guys backside so hard that you're struggling to try get it all accomplished. So I see your guys' amendments. I hear your heart. I think that, and maybe I can be corrected if I'm wrong, but I think that in some ways this is already offered in 232, and maybe not as all-encompassing of a way, but a way where if there's still the opportunity for the Secretary of State to call for an audit and to fund that audit in each one of the counties. Am I right in that?
Clerk Freeze.
Mr. Chairman, Representative Harrelson, thank you very much. Exactly. I think that the bill that we have worked with you on and agreed to administer, I think it does that. And with all due respect to the person bringing the representative bringing this bill, that doesn't mean you can't bring it to another session after we figure out how much of these things you've asked us to do, did that work? Did that give confidence to the electors? But we can't keep adding a bunch of things that's going to make that schedule. We don't want to fail. And as you can see, with even one failure in Weston County, that's not going away, and that's hurting all of us, and all of us have made mistakes. We have one shot at this. There's no dress rehearsal for this. There's one shot at this to get this right. So please give us the opportunity to help the people get confidence in some small steps like the ones we already have going. So with all due respect, thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Clerk Freeze. Further questions? Seeing none, thank you, Clerk Freeze, for
Thank you
being
so
here
much.
today. All right. Do we have any other comment, anyone that would like to comment on this bill? Mr. Ryman, thank you for being here. Welcome to Appropriations. Please proceed.
Great to see you, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. I'm Jeremiah Riemann here on behalf of the Wyoming County Commissioners Association. I appreciate the opportunity to briefly address you. I do also want to just recognize that I've got one of my county commissioners in the room. Commissioner Dave North from Natrona County is just behind me. We don't have a position in terms of the policy that you're looking to take here, but do have something to say about the costs associated with this, and would appreciate your consideration of what the clerks have asked in terms of a mechanism to pay for those costs. A couple of years ago, Representative Nyman at the time, Speaker Nyman now, had brought a runoff election bill, and I worked very closely with him to introduce an amendment to that that would simply say that the costs incurred with carrying out that runoff election would be borne by the Secretary of State, who would then reimburse the county treasurers for those costs. Happy to provide that language to you. I did want to, Mr. Chairman, just make a quick note about the monies that the counties have received as a result of property tax increases. And I appreciate that every county has saw some increase in terms of residential property, but I think it's important to look at the broader context of property taxes. There are 8 counties in this state that between 2015 and 2024 now collect less property taxes across all classes. Those 8 counties are Bighorn, Campbell, Carbon, Fremont, Hot Springs, Johnson, Sweetwater, and Uinta counties. Johnson County alone collects 50% less in property taxes across all property tax classes than it did in 2015. Those have an impact on budgets and their ability to pay for additional costs, and it's only responsible that we also look at the property tax measures and sales and use tax measures that you all are looking at this session and the potential those could have on us. So I just want to be very careful when we talk about the excess revenues. That's not necessarily the case when you look across the landscape more broadly. With that, Mr. Chairman, I'd stand for questions. Again, I'm happy to provide all this information to anybody.
Thank you, Mr. Riemann. Any questions for Mr. Riemann? Seeing none, thank you very much for being here. Appreciate your comments. Any further public testimony on House Bill 217? Thank you, Ms. Simmons, for being here. Please introduce yourself and welcome to Appropriations.
Good morning, Chairman and Committee. I'm Gail Simmons with Y Vote in Civics 307. However, you're welcome to call me Doña Quixote. On the hand count reminder, the reason that hand counts are they are inaccurate, costly, and time-consuming. And since the confounding of these conversations keep bringing up Weston, I would like to point out that the reason that hand counts are inaccurate are because of human error. And what causes human error? People are tired, they're rushed, or they're not experienced, or they don't have the proper training. I'm going to give you a Bertrand Russell quote around all of this on hand counts. The fact that an opinion has been widely held is no evidence whatever that it is not utterly absurd. We need to address the inaccurate understanding of a clearly broad number of people about hand counts versus machine counts. The clerks are duly elected officers of the counties under Title 18. They are separately, they answer to their constituents. The Secretary of State is identified under 22-2103, and specifically it states that, and of course, I got rid of the exact, but that office's responsibilities is for the uniform application. The Secretary of State is not responsible for the administration of elections. Those are provided to the counties. If we want to change the responsibilities between counties and states, there are some other statutes that you need to open up and change. Setting policy and statutes because the Secretary is big mad, they are independent, is not good policy. I want to address, since it came up, on the whole precincts. I'm going to use Albany County. There are 11 precincts in Albany County. They have, on average, well, they range from a low, based on the general election, a low of 544 ballots to a high of 3,649. On average, they have 1,636 ballots cast in a precinct, and on a median, it is 1,612. We are talking significant numbers. So the point that I'm making here is, again, Doña Quixote, this is an unnecessary and inappropriate insertion of the Secretary of State in the administration of county elections, which are the responsibility of the clerks. If you pass this, that needs to come out of the budget of the Secretary of State. But to the point, Mr. Chairman, that Representative Haroldson made, this is an unnecessary duplication to reassure people who have been convinced that hand counts are a better option than machine counts. And so I am on and against, and I stand for any questions.
Thank you, Ms. Simmons. Any questions for Ms. Simmons? Seeing none, thank you for being here. Please state your name, who you represent, on or against this bill, and tell us your thoughts.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. My name is Marissa Carpio. I am a policy director for the Equality State Policy Center. We are a nonpartisan nonprofit that's been in the state for 30 years, focused on fair elections and transparent government. We are on and in opposition to this bill. We have several pieces of research that I am more than happy to send you that shows that hand counting is inaccurate, it's time consuming, and it's expensive. However, if you do pass this bill, I would urge you to consider the amendments the clerk brought for both the appropriations and the extension of time. I think those are needed if this bill is even possible to carry out. I will also push back on the public trust issue a little bit. According to some research conducted by the University of Wyoming, 94% of Wyomingites are confident that our votes are being counted accurately by our county clerks. So again, we support adding the clerk's amendments, but at the end of the day, we oppose this bill and hope it fails, and I'll stand for any questions.
Thank you, Ms. Carpio. Any questions from Ms. Carpio? Go ahead, Representative Haroldson.
Thank you very much. So one of the things I think I'm going to respectfully push back on, yours and just maybe a little bit before you in testimony, this is the role of the Secretary of State. This is the job of the Secretary of State. Now, I think that we need to understand that. But I also think that we need to ask the question of to what extent and how much. And I think those are the questions that we're having to answer in this. So as we look at it, the checks and balance of the system is there of local, state. And I think that one of the things that, as we knocked on doors, we saw time and time again that people are questioning. They are. And there is at an all-time low. People are going, is this system working? So our job as legislatures, the job of the executive branch is to reestablish that trust in the system. And that's the battle we fight every single day, is what does that look like to reestablish that trust in the system, to continue to bolster that trust in the system. So as you guys are looking and going through your results, have you seen anyone, I mean, have you seen that sentiment of we just need to have that concern taken care of? Have you seen that?
Ms. Carpio.
Thank you, Chairman Bear. Representative Haroldson, I will say, I didn't mention anything about the Secretary of State's powers, though I do think an appropriation should be made, mostly because of the reasons the clerks in the county stated. And as to the public trust issue, on a widespread basis, most Wyomingites have trust in our election systems. There are people who maybe don't trust our processes that we have right now, and I actually think that is because of some actors fanning the flames of election distrust more than what the widespread public believes.
Thank you, Ms. Carpio. Further questions from Ms. Carpio? All right. Seeing none, thank you for being here. Any further comments from the public? Please. Ms. Slagle, welcome to Appropriations.
So, I am.
To the chair, please.
I am from Weston County,
and I was one of the people that counted those ballots. We counted a whole county worth of ballots, a half when we did CHIPS, the Representative Nyman's election, and then the county commissioner election was the whole county. We got it done in a half a day. It'd be very interesting to know how much it cost, because I know the people from the public that counted weren't paid, so it had the county clerk's office was there working, but I don't know what the actual hand count costs, but that would be very interesting, because from my perspective, I could not see that it cost anything extra. As far as from the people's trust in elections, it was very interesting. After that election, people from multiple counties said to me, how do we know we actually won? What if this happened in our county? How do we know that we lost? What if this happened in our county? And I just think that doing a random sample in a county of one precinct, that's a great way to figure out whether our system is actually working. And the machines count right, but if we hadn't hand counted that stuff in House District 1 election, we would not have seen. It was the hand counting that figured out the error. It wasn't the machines.
Okay. Any questions for Ms. Slagle? Seeing none, thank you for being here. We appreciate you. All right. Seeing no further public comment, we will close public comment. Just to make sure, Ms. Childress, we don't have anyone else online, do we? Okay. All right. Committee, what's your pleasure? Okay. No motion to move. That dies without a motion. We'll be moving on to House Bill 288, and if Representative Lean could come forward. Welcome to House Appropriations, Ms. Lean. Representative Lean, let me say it that way. Please proceed.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm Representative Jamie Lean from House District 38. I have before you House Bill 288 today, and this just oversees our Parks and Rec boards. I know that with property tax reform and relief that is coming, I'm looking for creative ways to be able to offset some of the costs within our counties so that they can adjust their budgets accordingly for any of that relief that may be coming. This is one way that we can do it. Currently in Natrona County, we do not have a Parks and Rec board. And so I am proposing that within this current statute of, let me walk you through 189201, that we just add some language that makes that board optional so that the current city, county, town, and school districts can continue to oversee the parks and recs that are already there. We do have a parks director in place, and he oversees all of the employees and the equipment to do that staffing. So that by not having this Parks and Rec board in place through the county, we'll save between $500,000 and $1.5 million, depending on how much they want to appropriate, the wages that go with running that board, and the like. I'll walk you through. Page 1 just tells you what the bill does. Page 2 adds that language. It starts at line 7 and adds, if the governing body of any city, town, county, or school district sits as the board of trustees for the system of public recreation, it shall not be subject to the requirements of Wyoming statute 189102 A, B, D, or H. And that statute just allows for that board to be set up and that it consists of 5 members. That same language is inserted again in section C, just to maintain formality throughout the statute. And then on page 3, that same verbiage is placed again so that it's very clear that if we do not have a board of trustees, that Parks and Rec is governed by the same city, town, county, or school district. I did have the clerk pass out one amendment for you. I did find a grammatical error On page 2, line 5, just strike the shall, but then reinsert it on page 6. If we read that, it makes more sense to have the shall appoint a board of
Representative
trustees.
Lean, just to clear that up since you brought up the amendment. You said page 6, I think you mean line 6, page 2, correct?
Yes, thank you.
Proceed.
Page 2, line 5, strike shall, and then reinsert on page 2, line 6.
Thank you.
Thank you for the clarity, Chairman. And then amendment that has come to my attention that I would propose that the board be able to put in is, or the committee be able to put in, is page 2, line 11, after H, that we insert, except a board that has been in existence for 5 years prior to the implementation of this amendment. This is just to not interfere with boards that are already in existence, that if a county wants to dissolve them, they could, but that they don't have to. And with that, I'm open to any questions.
All right. Thank you, Representative Lean. Any questions for the bringer of the bill? Okay, seeing none, thank you for being here. And Mr. Commissioner, would you like to come up, share your thoughts on this? Thank you for being here. Welcome to House Appropriations.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Please introduce yourself to the committee and tell us your thoughts on this bill.
I'm Dave North. I'm one of the commissioners in Natrona County, and I'm speaking here on my own behalf. I'm not representing anybody else as far as that goes, but this is something that it's actually we've known about for a long time. And what it does is it just gives all the subdivisions, including the county and everything else, an option. It doesn't say you have to do it. It just says that if you choose to, you may. So it's really just an optional system. And with the property tax that are going through, it gives us an option that may save some of these, especially the smaller communities around the state, the smaller districts and everything else, as well as the big ones, an opportunity to move through and work things that are best for them and not just be legislated. It puts local control back in, is really what it comes down to. With that, I will be happy to answer any questions.
Any questions for Commissioner North? Commissioner North, I should have asked the bringer, but she mentioned a savings of anywhere from $500,000 to $1 million. Are you familiar with what that was about? And
Yes, I am. In Natrona County, about 4 years ago, we actually had a study done to see what it would actually cost. And at that time, it just depends on the extent. Obviously, that's going to be dependent on the county and or whatever the subdivision is. But with the numbers that we came up with that time, with personnel setting up all the intricacies that go along with a statutory board, the bottom line was about $500,000 in our county. And then the upper end, just depending on how many people you have, how many computers, if you have to set up it in a different office or anything else, that's where those numbers came from.
Okay, so the study showed that by consolidating, is that what I'm hearing, that consolidating this under one board for both the city and the county and all the subdivisions, that's how the savings would be? I understood it as the savings.
If you had to go out and set up the statutory board separately, that's where those costs would come in. So yeah, by having it, so allowing commissioners, in our case, to directly support our parks director and let him do that instead of having to have a statutory board, then that's where those savings come in.
Okay. Representative Elliman.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Chairman North, this would be a very large board, and it would probably take quite a little of the 500,000. Is that correct?
Mr. Chairman, Representative Alman, that is correct. It would, and that's something that I've always been concerned about. Is especially in today's world, everything's going up, and we need to look at what we can to give our different places options.
Follow-up, please.
Representative Allen, go ahead with the follow-up.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So this would save the taxpayers of Natrona County a lot of money, correct?
Mr. Chairman.
Commissioner North.
Representative Alman, yes, it would.
All right, any further questions? Commissioner North, thank you very much for being here.
Thank you for your time.
Any further public comment? All right, seeing none, is there anyone online? Nope. All right, we'll close public comment. Committee, what's your pleasure? Moved by Representative Alman, seconded by Representative Sherwood, starting on line 1, or page 1. Page 2. Representative Harrelson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I would suggest 2 amendments on page 2. One would be the grammar cleanup, striking shall on page 2, line 5, and reinserting it. Page 2, line 6. And if you give me the liberty, I'd add a second in, and we'll just do them as one amendment.
Okay.
Okay.
Liberty
The second
granted.
would be page 2, line 11, after H, and insert, except if a board has been in existence for 5 years prior to implementation of this amendment. And that would be just to clarify, there would be a grandfather clause.
All right, you heard the amendment brought by Harrelson, seconded by Sherwood. Any discussion on the amendment? Seeing none, all those in favor say aye. Aye. All those opposed, no. That carries. All right. Page 3. And page 4. Any discussion on the bill? Representative Sherwood.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I just want to thank the bringer of this bill. This is just a really great way to help out our communities and bring flexibility. I think it's creative problem solving at its best, so thank you.
Okay. Any further comment? Seeing none. Ms. Childers, please take the roll.
Roll call vote on House Bill 288 do pass with amendments. Representative Alleman.
Aye.
Representative Angelos. Aye. Representative Harrelson.
Aye.
Representative Pendergraft.
Aye.
Representative Sherwood.
Aye.
Representative Smith voted aye via absentee. Chairman Bear.
Aye.
Mr. Chairman, 7 aye.
Thank you very much, and we are adjourned.